Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, and you can hear also, no? My voice
Yes,
is clear, right?
very well. Yes, yes.
Okay. So once again, good evening to everybody. I am very thankful to Sudha Madam for giving me an opportunity to interact with all of you in this evening. So we will be. I'm sorry that I will not be able to speak in Tamil fluently. I know only very little of Tamil, so it will be predominantly in English. I can handle a few Tamil words, but it will be mainly in English. So the scheme of the today's interaction would be, one will be a brief introduction on Parkinson's disease. I'm sure that all of you know about Parkinson's disease, but I don't know how much you know. So to understand DBS, we should understand Parkinson's disease first. So initial part will be on introduction of Parkinson's disease. Then a few words on what happens in the brain in patients with Parkinson's disease, medical treatment of Parkinson's disease and the limitations of medical treatment. Then how does deep brain stimulation help? When is it to be done and how is it done? In whom it should be done and in whom it should not be done, and what are the limitations of DBS? So these will be the points which I would like to cover in today's interaction. So Parkinson's, I am sure everybody knows the person whose picture is shown in the slide. He is Sir James Parkinson. He was a British scientist and a physician. Even though Parkinson's disease was present probably right from the origin of mankind, we don't know when it was but probably it was present since the origin of mankind. And there are descriptions of descriptions which could signify Parkinson's disease in ancient Ayurvedic literature as well as in the ancient Western medical literature. But the first description of Parkinson's disease in the modern medicine was given by Sir James Parkinson in 1817 in his well-celebrated the thesis called the Essay on the Shaking Palsy. So he called Parkinson's disease shaking palsy. He observed a few patients and asked the patients had tremors and they had difficulty in performing movements. He called this disease shaking palsy. This essay came in 1817, and over the past 200 plus years, a lot of advances have happened in the understanding regarding the pathogenesis and as well as treatment of Parkinson's disease. The name Parkinson's disease was given by another scientist by name Jean-Martin Charcot. He was a French scientist. He was a French physician. He gave the name Parkinson's disease. He renamed the shaking palsy as Parkinson's disease. He also introduced the treatment with alkaloid hyoscine derived from Datura plant. This treatment was in vogue till the emergence of levodopa treatment. So everybody knows, I hope that everybody knows that it is a disease which affects the brain. Even though the manifestations involve the limbs, the walking and other body functions, this disease affects brain. And it is common in old age. It is generally known as a disease of old age. And to mention a statistics, approximately 1 in 100 of people more than 60 years develop PD. That is, if you take 100 people, more than 60 to 65 years of age, one will be having Parkinson's disease. So it's a common disease. Even though it is considered as a disease of the elderly, it can occur in younger ages also. Around 10% of the patients with Parkinson's disease have their onset less than 45 years. And some people, like we have treated and we have done DBS for patients in whom Parkinson's disease started even before 20 years. That is extremely rare. There are certain genetic forms of Parkinson's disease which start before the age of 20 years, which is extremely rare. Generally, the age of onset is around 55 to 60 years, but in 10%, it can be less than 45 years. The symptoms, all of you know, one of the common symptoms or the hallmark of Parkinson's disease is tremor. There is also stiffness of the limbs. The movements become slow. There is no weakness as such. Those who are living with Parkinson's disease, they know that you can grip something firmly. It is the slowness of movement which interferes with activities. There is no paralysis or weakness as such. It is slowness of movement. And there is also loss of balance. So as you can see, all these symptoms pertain to muscle functions. So these are called movement-related or motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. In addition, Parkinson's disease can have certain other features like micrographia. The handwriting becomes small, mask-like faces. The face becomes expressionless. The blink rate comes down, and there is something called freezing of gait. Freezing of gait is a very strange phenomenon which is seen in those with fairly advanced stages of Parkinson's disease, in which the patients can move their limbs, but when they try to walk, sitting on a chair, they may be able to move their legs, but when they try to walk, they feel that the legs are getting stuck to the ground or feet are glued to the ground. So this phenomenon is called freezing of gait. And a flexed posture, a bent posture is also one of the features of Parkinson's disease. But apart from these movement related features, Parkinson's disease patients can have a lot of other symptoms also. There are something called neuropsychiatric symptoms in which depression, they feel depressed, excess degree of anxiety, hallucinations, psychosis, impulse control disorder. This can all occur in some patients with Parkinson's disease as a part of the disease. And some of them in late stages can have some memory dysfunction or cognitive or intellectual dysfunction. Then sleep disorders can occur. Disturbance of autonomic nervous system like difficulty to control urinary function, sexual dysfunction, sweating abnormalities, drooling of saliva, constipation, all these can sometimes occur in patients with Parkinson's disease. And alteration in the taste, smell as well as taste, and pain and numbness of limbs, particularly during off period, is another symptom which is reported by patients with Parkinson's disease. And all of you know that patients with Parkinson's experience more of fatigue compared to normal people. So one another question is, this is not directly related to DBS, but why do I have PD? So what is the cause for Parkinson's disease? It is poorly understood as there is no single cause for Parkinson's disease. So it is because of so many complex multiple factors, and it is believed that genetic factors, the genetic makeup of each and every individual when they are born, that has a role in Parkinson's disease. And there are certain environmental factors like certain pesticides, but you know that all those patients who have Parkinson's disease do not have any exposure to pesticides. So there are so many unidentified factors also underlying the genesis of Parkinson's disease. The current concept is that Parkinson's disease occurs because of a genetic background and superadded environmental factors. So if the movement related abnormalities of Parkinson's disease occur as a result of damage to an area of the brain called substantia nigra. This substantia nigra, you can see in the picture that arrow mark indicates the substantia. There is a black longitudinally placed area there that is called substantia nigra. And in patients with Parkinson's disease, the cells here degenerate or die off. And as a result, you can see there are two sections of the brain which are shown. In one, that blackish area is very clearly evident. Other one, it is faded. The faded brain section is from a patient with Parkinson's disease. That is because this dopamine secreting cells in the substantia nigra are blackish in color, and when these cells are lost, that blackish tinge there gets faded. So this nerve cells in substantia nigra secrete a substance called dopamine, and the deficiency of dopamine results in the brain because of damage to cells producing dopamine results in the clinical features or results in tremor and other movement related symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So this is just a microscopic picture of this, may not be of interest to you. So the important one important thing which has to be understood is that the nerve cell damage or the brain damage is not confined to substantia nigra. Brain damage, as people believe with Parkinson's disease for several years, the nerve cell damage occurs in certain other parts of the brain also, and that is the basis of all the non-motor symptoms which we discussed, like sleep disturbances, autonomic dysfunction, memory dysfunction. All those things result from spread of the Parkinson's disease related changes to other areas of the brain other than substantia nigra. So diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is purely clinical. You have to examine the patient, interact with the patient, and there may not be any test. For example, if you do an MRI scan and all, you may not find any changes in patients with Parkinson's disease because these changes occur at a cellular level. So diagnosis is basically a clinical diagnosis. And treatment, as you know, there are many similarities with Parkinson's disease and diabetes. I am comparing with diabetes because diabetes is a much more common disease. We know that 25 to 30% of elderly people have diabetes. So it's very common, much more common than Parkinson's disease. You know that in diabetes, the insulin in the body, insulin is a hormone or it's a chemical substance which helps to keep blood sugar in normal range. So what happens? Insulin is secreted by cells in an organ in the abdomen called pancreas gland. So in diabetes, what happens is the cells or the islet cells which secrete insulin are lost. So and that results in reduction in insulin, and that leads to diabetes. Exactly similar to this, in Parkinson disease, the nerve cells which produce dopamine in the brain are lost. So just as diabetes is insulin deficiency, the movement related symptoms of Parkinson disease are due to dopamine deficiency. You know that unfortunately, as of now, diabetes cannot be completely cured now. That is, the damaged islet cells cannot be repaired or replaced. And you treat diabetes by giving insulin or supplementing insulin, diet control, etc. But these therapies has to be continued lifelong. Just like that, Parkinson's disease also cannot be cured as of now because damaged nerve cells cannot be restored. But we can treat Parkinson's disease by supplementing dopamine. So in patients with diabetes, if you treat correctly, scientifically, if you treat diabetes, you can see, you can see that even if diabetes cannot be cured, patients can have a near normal life and have a normal longevity. Just like that, Parkinson's disease also, if you treat it correctly, even though you cannot cure it, you can improve the patient's quality of life, improve the patient's functioning, and help the patient to have a near normal and life with a normal lifespan. So treatment of diabetes is you treat exogenously, you replace the lost insulin in the body. Just like that, treatment of Parkinson's disease, the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease is replacement of dopamine's activity in the brain. So many of you with Parkinson's disease may be taking the medicine called levodopa. It is available as a Syndopa or Tidomet or LCD. There are different company names for it, but it contains an active ingredient called levodopa. It is the most powerful drug for Parkinson's disease because it directly replaces dopamine in the brain. You cannot take dopamine as such because dopamine, if you take orally in the intestine, it will get destroyed. So levodopa is a precursor of dopamine, or it means that levodopa is a substance which the body can convert into dopamine in the brain. So you give levodopa, it bypasses the intestinal mechanisms which destroy dopamine, gets into the circulation, gets into the brain, and in the brain, levodopa gets converted into dopamine, and it relieves the movement-related symptoms of Parkinson's disease. This George Koutsias is the scientist, or is a physician who used levodopa first for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. So there are certain other medications also which help to improve the activity of dopamine in the brain, not directly like levodopa, but these medications mimic the action of dopamine in the brain. There are so many medications like that. So how to choose the treatment? You have to look at the age of the patient, the duration of the disease, severity of the symptoms, coexisting non-motor symptoms, whether the patient has sleep disturbances, depression, all those things you will have to consider, and then you have to tailor the treatment according to the patient's state. And affordability is also a factor. Some of these medications are very costly. For example, pramipexole is much more costly compared to levodopa. So affordability is also a factor. So what happens is when the patient is started on levodopa, we call it the honeymoon phase, because you are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Patient feels a little depressed because I have a disease. Earlier I was healthy. I have a disease. Patient is a little depressed. You counsel the patient. You start on treatment with levodopa, and patient symptoms improve very well. So this phase is called honeymoon phase in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. Patient is quite happy. So, but after some time, or after a duration of treatment with levodopa, what happens is, in spite of taking the medicine Syndopa or Tridomet or whatever which contains levodopa, the patient develops certain problems. One is called motor fluctuations. Second one is called drug-induced dyskinesias. Motor fluctuation simply means this much. That is, in the initial part of Parkinson's disease, when you are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, in the initial years, if you take 3 doses of levodopa or 4 doses of levodopa a day, your symptoms are controlled throughout the 24-hour day period. That means there are no ups and downs in your symptoms. But after some time, what happens is that the effect of levodopa, the duration of levodopa improvement comes down. This is because you are not curing Parkinson disease with levodopa. You are controlling the symptoms only. Parkinson disease in the brain gradually progresses with passage of years. So you will require more and more levodopa, and you take the tablet. Your effect lasts only for a brief period. That is, from a stable state of control, patient goes into an on and off situation. That is, patient gets an on period for 3 hours, 4 hours, then the patient turns off. That means symptoms return. Patient takes the next tablet. Again, he or she turns on, becomes normal. Again, after 3-4 hours, effects goes off, takes the next tablet, like that. So there's an on period, that is a period of good improvement, and an off period, that is a period in which all the Parkinsonian symptoms return. So this is called motor fluctuation. And as years pass by, the duration of on period progressively comes down, and duration of off period progressively goes up. So this will necessitate taking more and more doses of levodopa. Initially, patient is on 3 doses, well controlled. 2-3 years later, it may have to be increased to 4 doses, 5 doses, 6 doses, like that. So this is what is called motor fluctuation. The effect of individual doses progressively comes down. Second one is called drug-induced dyskinesias. Even though you call it drug-induced, they are not strictly drug-induced. It is not a side effect of drug. It is because the dyskinesias occur when the medicines act on a brain in which the dopaminergic cell damage has gone beyond a particular level. So it is not created by the drug. It is basically related to the disease itself. But when the medicine acts on the brain, in a diseased brain, this dyskinesia happens. I hope everybody knows what is dyskinesia. Dyskinesia means involuntary movement. That is, it is not tremor. When a patient with Parkinson's takes levodopa, turns on, instead of having a comfortable on, they start getting dancing movements. This dancing movement is called dyskinesia. That is, off period, patient has all the Parkinson related symptoms, tremor, stiffness, slowness, difficulty to walk. When they turn on, the stiffness improves, tremor improves, rigidity improves, but they start having involuntary movements. So, as if the treatment is symptomatic, purely symptomatic, the aim of the treatment is just to control the symptoms, to give a good quality of life for the patient. And if you take too much of medications quite early, if you take the moment you start having motor fluctuations, you increase the dose, take a lot of levodopa initially, you are likely to develop dyskinesias and motor fluctuations quite early. So it is you have to take the medicines wisely. Those in the early stages of Parkinson disease, you have to the symptoms have to be controlled for having a normal functioning, but don't aim at perfect normalcy or total lack of all symptoms, because that will, even though you'll be happy today, after 1 or 2 years, the dyskinesias may occur early, the motor fluctuations may occur early. So you have to weigh benefits against side effects. So that is what we discussed. And then physiotherapy and exercise are equally important as medications. Regular physiotherapy and exercise is an essential part of treatment. Physiotherapy, regular exercise, it has been shown that exercise is something which could even retard the progression of Parkinson disease. So every day we have to do physiotherapy, give exercise to the body. That is very important. And treatment of Parkinson disease, there has to be a holistic approach. You have to identify, just not only treat the motor symptom, but you have to identify and treat non-motor problems like depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, urinary disturbances, sexual dysfunction, etc. if present. Treatment of constipation is important. Counseling of the patient is important, and psychological support is also important. That is what I understand Sudha madam is doing. All these groups and all these patient support groups will help a lot in this aspect, counseling of the patients and family members and psychological support. And understanding about disease is also very important. So with a proper treatment, which includes not only medications, but physiotherapy and other supportive care, psychological support, etc., this improves the patient's functioning, ability to do daily activities, ability to do employment, and improves the quality of life. So when to consider surgery is the next question. So Surgery is considered when optimal medical treatment fails to give adequate relief of motor symptoms. So there are a lot of relative terms here. So what is the adequate relief of motor symptoms? Somebody who is going to office, or somebody who is employed, somebody who is a breadwinner, sole breadwinner of the family, he may require a much better control than somebody who is retired and remaining at home. So for the patient and family, what is the adequate or what is the desired level of control of symptoms is important. So the doctor treats the disease optimally, adjusts the dose of medications, but in spite of adjusting the medications, so the improvement of symptoms to the satisfaction of the patient and family is not happening. So that is the situation when a DBS has to be done. So you can, it also means that you should not try DBS without trying optimal medical treatment. That is, you should try adjustment with medications. Or whatever adjustment is done, you increase the dose of medication, patient develops worsening of dyskinesias. Controlling of dyskinesias, you reduce the medications, patient gets worsening of time. So when such a situation is reached, such a state is reached, you have to consider DBS. And this happens when motor fluctuations, that is the on-off states with reduced on period, and dyskinesias, that is the abnormal dance-like movements, they tend to have an impact on the patient's quality of life. So that is when you have to consider DBS, or your optimal medical treatment is not giving you sufficient time to take care of your activities, your desired activity, your daily activities, or your employment. And contraindications, that is when should DBS not be done. So DBS should not be done when there is severe and uncorrected depression. That is an important aspect. Patients may feel that my depression, I am depressed, I am sad because I am unable to move. It is not like that. Because in patients with Parkinson disease, there are so many patients who are like much more disabled than Parkinson's disease patients, but who have not much of depression, or whose mood is fairly well preserved. This is because in Parkinson disease, just as the dopamine in the brain comes down, other neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, serotonin, etc., which are important in your mood and your initiative, those sort of things also, those sort of neurotransmitters also come down, because the nerve cell damage affects the nerve cells producing these sort of neurotransmitters also. So depression is an inherent phenomenon, which is inherent a symptom or inherent dysfunction which is seen in Parkinson's disease. It may not always be reactive to the patient's disability. So somebody who has severe and uncorrected depression, and depression will not improve with DBS. DBS is done to improve the movement related or motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So if there is uncorrected depression, patient may not be able to identify or may not be able to appreciate the benefits of DBS. And there are certain other problems also in taking up depressed patients for DBS surgery. So depression should be corrected. Significant memory and cognitive problems and active psychosis. Some patients with Parkinson disease can have psychotic symptoms. I am not telling that everybody will have. It is seen in a subsection of patients with Parkinson disease. If there are psychotic symptoms, means hallucinations, seeing things which are not there, once in a while all patients may have it, like feeling of that somebody has just passed behind you, or somebody is standing there, you just go and see there, nobody is there, you are convinced, but that is not a problem. But there are patients who have florid hallucinations. They do not have insight. They strongly believe that whatever they are seeing are true. And there are patients with delusions or behavioral problems also. If there are such issues, it has to be treated by a qualified psychiatrist, controlled, and then only patient can be taken for DBS. Similarly, those with significant degree of memory issues, cognitive dysfunction, late stages of the disease, such patients also are not candidates for deep brain stimulation surgery. Similarly, only those patients who are responding to levodopa will respond to DBS also. That means those patients who have improvement with levodopa, they are severely disabled in off, but when they take levodopa, their symptoms improve. But the improvement is only for a brief period, and there are dyskinesias also. That is the situation in which DBS is considered. If symptoms are not improving at all with levodopa, or even in the best tone state also, patient has persisting disability, freezing of gait, and other problems, then DBS is not a recommended treatment. And then just like any other surgery, uncontrolled medical problems like diabetes, high blood pressure, etc., these are also contraindications for DBS. So the limitations of the DBS, we should know that what are the limitations of DBS. DBS also, just like medical treatment, it also is unable to cure the disease or arrest the progression of the disease. It is just a symptom control measure. When your symptoms are not adequately controlled with medications, you try with DBS. That's all. It doesn't cure the disease. It does not prevent or control most of the non-motor problems of Parkinson's disease. As we discussed, if there is depression, it has to be medically treated. If there are psychotic symptoms, it has to be medically treated. Sleep problems sometimes may improve with DBS, because many patients with Parkinson's disease, their sleep problems are because of immobility. They are unable to turn in bed during night. If sleep problems are related to that, that will improve with DBS. But otherwise, inherent insomnia or other sleep problems may not improve with DBS. So if their non-motor symptoms are generally not much well controlled by DBS. And we discussed the something called freezing of gait. This freezing of gait, that is the inability, the feeling of that the feet are glued to the ground, particularly if it is persisting during on period, may not get a satisfactory control with DBS. And postural instability, again, if patient is falling, that also will not improve with DBS. Then we know that it's a little costly procedure, and you need to replace the stimulator also periodically. But the advantage is that it significantly improves the movement related symptoms of PD, that is tremor, slowness, stiffness, etc. will be significantly improved. And those patients who have good improvement during on period but very little on period, these are the patients who are taken up for DBS, and such patients will have a prolongation of their own period, and this will enable independent performance of activities of daily living, and many of the patients may be able to even to return for their employment for at least for a few years. And thereby, DBS improves the quality of life of the patients. So DBS just it adds life to the years of the patient. If patient selection is done carefully, that is the aim of DBS. That is, your life becomes more lively. You are able to do more things. You are able to look after yourself and your family better. You are able to enjoy your life better. So for at least for a few more years. So that is what DBS does to a patient with Parkinson's disease, if patient selection is done carefully. So how does deep brain stimulation work? Deep brain stimulation doesn't correct the deficiency of dopamine in the brain. That is not the mechanism by which it acts. Deficiency of dopamine in the brain leads to abnormal activity of a group of nerve cells in an area of the brain called subthalamic nucleus. This subthalamic nucleus is the commonest or the most commonly used target for DBS. There are certain other brain targets also, like the globus pallidus, which are targeted in DBS, but it is usually the subthalamic nucleus. So in these, whether it is subthalamic nucleus or globus pallidus, the deficiency of dopamine in the brain leads to abnormality of the activity of these areas, and this abnormality leads to defective control of muscles and movements. So what DBS does is it delivers precisely programmed electrical impulses into this target nucleus, whether it is subthalamic nucleus or globus pallidus, and regulate their activity. And this results in control of movement-related symptoms resulting from Parkinson's disease. So DBS doesn't correct the dopamine deficiency in the brain. It corrects the abnormalities downstream, that is abnormalities which result in the brain from dopamine deficiency. So this graph will show how DBS is going to help. You can see that first graph is state before surgery, in which there are very steep ups and downs. There are on periods and off periods. Off periods in which patient has significant difficulties, while on period is period of improvement but with dyskinesis. What DBS does is it gives a baseline improvement of symptoms so that the off disability doesn't dip to a very low levels. So your symptoms are fairly controlled. It may not be as good as on, but 50% of on state you may get in the usual off state also, and your on period as such may get extended or it may get prolonged, so that the oscillations are dampened. Unlike the steep oscillations, little more dampened oscillations are there, and most of the time you are able to do your activities of daily living. So this is what DBS does. So patient selection, as we discussed, is most important. All patients with Parkinson's disease are not candidates for DBS. Age is a factor. it depends. Many centers, some centers which do DBS follow very stringent selection criteria to improve their DBS outcomes. But most centers all over the world, the cutoff which generally is used is 70 years. If you ask, can DBS be done for somebody who is 72? It can be done on a case-to-case basis. You have to decide on a case-to-case basis. But generally, more than 70, you should think twice before taking up a patient for DBS. Then comorbidities, whether patient has diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiac disease, whether there are significant comorbidities which result in increasing the surgical risk, that has to be considered. Then there has to be a stable neuropsychiatric status. Many patients with Parkinson's disease have depression. They may have some psychotic hallucinations or psychotic symptoms, but it should be, these should be treated and should be controlled well, and only then patient should be taken up for DBS. And level of disability and symptoms causing disability should be assessed. That is, what is the symptom which causes disability? If it is tremor, okay, good candidate for DBS. If it is slowness and stiffness, good candidate for DBS. If it is freezing of gait, okay, we can consider. But if it is imbalance, falls, etc., you cannot consider, because imbalance, falls, freezing, etc., may not respond that much to DBS. So what are the symptoms which cause the predominant disability to the patient? That has to be considered. Then cardiac fitness should be there because it's a long surgery, and psychiatric fitness should be taken. Blood pressure should be normal, and general blood test all should be normal. There should not be any active infections in the body, because you are putting an implant into the body. If there is an active infection in the body, the implant can get infected. And whatever other illness, the patients, elderly patients may have other problems. They may have asthma or they may have diabetes. All these should be controlled well. So how is it done? So it is done. First, you have to find out what is, you have to locate the target in the brain. As we discussed, the usual target is something called subthalamic nucleus, which is located deep inside the brain. That is why it is called deep brain stimulation. So the subthalamic nucleus is situated in the depth of the brain. And so it is, the patient undergoes an MRI scan without a stereotactic frame as well as with a stereotactic frame. I'll let you know, I will show you what a stereotactic frame is in the subsequent slides. But patient undergoes an MRI scan, and in this MRI scan, the surgeon or the team or the doctors in the team just chart out or they mark the target nucleus. And then patient undergoes another MRI scan, another scan with a frame in place. And using these two MRI scans and some special techniques, how to reach the target is charted in the scan. So what we have to understand is that it is not an open surgery. You cannot cut open the brain and dissect and then go and locate the subthalamic nucleus and implant the electrode there, because it is a deep structure, and cutting open the whole brain till that area will cause a lot of damage. So it is done as a keyhole procedure or a stereotactic surgery. You put a just small hole in the skull, and through the skull, using special techniques, you put the electrode tip into the targeted area. That is what is done. And to ensure that the electrode tip has gone and has safely gone to the targeted area, there is an intraoperative electrophysiological and clinical testing. That is, it is generally done as an awake procedure. Patient is not given general anesthesia. The patient is given only the local anesthesia for the area in the skull where the burr hole is put. That is, in the skull, the surgeon puts a small burr hole, a small hole for the electrode to enter. That area is given local anesthesia. Apart from that, no general anesthesia is given during the initial part of the procedure in which the implantation of the electrodes in the brain is done. You may ask whether the patient will have pain when the electrode is advanced into the brain. We have to know that brain is a structure just like our nail or our hair. It is a painless structure. Even though brain is needed for perceiving pain in all other parts of the body, brain cannot perceive its own pain. So if you introduce a needle or even a knife into the brain, you will not have any pain. So the pain is there only when you drill the skull bone to make the hole. So that area can be anesthetized using local anesthesia. And subsequently, when you operate in the brain, electrode advances through the brain, patient will not have any sort of pain. So, so you keep the patient awake during the initial part of the surgery for intraoperative testing. That is, you place the electrode, the area where you target, you record activity from the brain in that area to ensure that it is the correct, or you have reached the area correctly. And also during the procedure, you pass electricity into that, electric current impulses into that area, and you ask the patient to do all the activities there. During surgery, I'll show you a video to ensure that electric current is being delivered correctly into the target area and patient is getting an improvement. So for all this monitoring, patient should be awake. So it is the patient who leads the surgeon. So the surgeons and doctors operate, but the patient leads the team. The patient tells where to put the electrode. The patient doesn't tell directly, but from the responses, the surgeon or the doctors understand where the electrode tip has to be placed. Once the electrodes are placed in the brain, the neurostimulators are placed in the chest wall. The chest wall means it is outside the chest wall, just under the skin, in the fat under the skin, a small pocket is made, and the stimulator or the battery IPG is placed there, and this electrode and IPG are connected. So that part is a painful procedure. So once the electrodes are implanted in the brain, the frame is removed and the patient is given general anesthesia, and the battery or the IPG implantation is done subsequently under general anesthesia. So what you have to understand is that patient's active participation in the surgery is a key feature. This is classically how DBS is done, but now asleep DBS techniques are also emerging. Asleep DBS means there are certain, especially inside the theater, you have an intraoperative MRI. That is, during the procedure, you can do MRI scans and then see the electrode, and then you can position. So that's the concept of asleep DBS. It is becoming slowly popular, but whether it is, how accurate it is not that well studied. So even now, the classical awake procedure with the intraoperative clinical and electrophysiological testing is the gold standard. But in future, it may be possible to do DBS without patient's cooperation and during using all these asleep DBS procedures. So after the surgery, patient has to be given good care. All precautions against infection has to be taken, and the stimulator has to be programmed to correctly control the symptoms of the patient. So this is the you can see this is a post-operative MRI in which you can see the electrode tip located in the subthalamic nucleus. So it is so deep, so you cannot cut open the brain and reach here. So it is just the electrode is just inserted like this. Its tip is visible here. I hope you can see. So this is a schematic diagram of how it will be, how it will appear. So this is the burr hole, and you have the electrodes just descending into the brain like this. So through the hole, you can see the electrode coming and sitting in the subthalamic nucleus here on both sides. So I hope all of you know that brain has two hemispheres or two halves, and right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So for control of symptoms on both sides, you have to have two electrodes, one on the left side and other on the right side. So, so this is the stereotactic frame. Don't be upset or don't be afraid seeing all this. So this is a very light, even though it looks a little heavy, it is actually very light. It is a very costly equipment. So this frame is fixed on the patient's skull before the surgery, and all the equipment for advancing the electrode through the brain is placed on this frame. So there has to be two scans. One scan is before surgery, a detailed scan to locate the target nucleus, and then another scan with this frame is done just before surgery, and these images are fused to plan the target as well as the trajectory. So this is how a burr hole will look like. You can see two burr holes here, and this is the DBS electrode which is placed inside the brain. This is the electrode tip which goes into the brain and sits in the subthalamic nucleus or whatever is the target. And this electrode is placed only after ensuring that the target, we have correctly reached the target by intraoperative microelectrode recording. That is, you can record the activity from the brain as you advance the electrode in the brain. And this recording, each part of the brain has got its own specific signature pattern of electrical activity. And subthalamic nucleus also has a specific activity. So you can record that activity and make sure that you have reached the patient's reached the target correctly. So this is just a video to show that, I don't know, you may not be able to appreciate it much. You can, this is a recording of the electrodes getting advanced into the brain. This is the baseline activity. This is how the activity will look like when before the electrode tips reach the subthalamic nucleus. Okay, so we have not reached the subthalamic nucleus. The electrode is gradually descending, and this is the activity which will look like when the electrode has successfully reached the subthalamic. You can definitely see the change in pattern. So this change, you slowly advance the electrode into the brain. When this change in pattern is clearly visible, it means that you have correctly reached the target. So this equipment is called micro electrode recording equipment. So using the micro, this is done during the time of surgery. This is a recording from the OT. Okay. So this is after you reach the target, you can do intraoperative testing. That is, what you do is, in the same place where your electrode, you have done the recording, you can advance electrodes and give a test stimulation during the surgery. So you can see that this gentleman is undergoing deep brain stimulation for Parkinson disease. This is a baseline recording. You can see the tremors on both sides. Both upper limbs are shaking. The patient is actually undergoing surgery. Electrodes, this is before the electrode implantation. Okay, so uh, you can see the tremors. Patient is active. The surgeon is asking his permission, a patient's permission to give local anesthesia. This is before the procedure starts. Okay, you can see the frame also. Uh, okay, so surgeon has inserted the electrodes and we are giving test stimulation. So test stimulation is given to the left subthalamic nucleus. So electrode is inserted into the left subthalamic nucleus and test stimulation is being given. Same patient. As we discussed, the left subthalamic nucleus controls the right side of the body. You can see what is the difference. You can see, no? So compared to the first video, you can see the difference. In first video, both sides are shaking. In the uh, second video, the right side is not shaking because we are stimulating the left subthalamic nucleus. So the patient is also telling that his right side, he is feeling an improvement of tremor. So you can see the frame here. Okay, so this confirms that electrode has correctly reached the subthalamic nucleus. And after you place the, you locate the position correctly, you have to increase the current and then see whether there are any side effects resulting from spread of current to nearby structures. You can see that the patient is alert, and whatever we are asking the patient to do, he is doing. He is tapping his finger because we are requested, and we are asking the patient how he is feeling. We are asking the patient to move his eyes. This is all being done while the patient is undergoing surgery. He is lying down very comfortably with the frame on his head and an electrode in his brain. He is quite comfortable. Okay, so we are testing his eye movements. Okay, so after the electrodes are successfully placed, you can do the, you can place the battery, and then you can, after a few days, once the patient is out of all the fatigue and other things of surgery, you can program the stimulator. So there are different IPG systems available. This picture is the IPG. These pictures belong to the Medtronic. Medtronic is one company which manufactures DBS equipment. There are other companies also like Boston Scientific and St. Jude, and so many companies are there now. But Medtronic is probably one among the pioneering companies. So that is why it is showing Medtronic there. So this is called a physician programmer. So using this equipment, you can program this. This is the IPG. This is the battery which is placed in the patient's chest wall here. This is just a schematic diagram. everything will be under the skin. So nothing will be visible outside. This is just for you to understand. This is just showing the position of the things. Everything will be under the skin. So when surgery is over, nothing will be visible outside. So this will be here, placed here under the skin of the chest wall. This is the IPG, and using this programmer, you can just keep this programmer over the IPG here over the skin, and you can communicate with the IPG or the battery here, and then you can program that. And there is another one called physician patient programmer. This can be given to the patient, and patient also will be able to make some minor adjustments in current or switch on or the switch off the stimulator using this physician and this patient programmer. So the benefits and risks of DBS. So the benefits are it improves the motor fluctuations, prolongs the on period, and improves the off period symptoms. So overall, the patient's mobility and motor symptoms improve. It controls dyskinesia as well. Patient's ability to do activities improve, and as a result, the quality of life also improves. But you have to understand that it's a neurosurgical procedure. There are some risks also. 1 to 2% risk of bleeding into the brain is there. That is intracerebral hemorrhage. So 100 patients undergoing DBS, 1 or 2 patients can have bleeding into the brain. So it may be inconsequential or may result in weakness of one side, or very extremely rarely, you know that any surgery has this, extremely rarely it can be a serious bleeding into the brain also. Then there is 1 to 4% risk of implant infections. That means you are putting a foreign body into your body. It can get it. There is a possibility that it can get infected. So there is a risk of implant infections. Then second part of surgery is under general anesthesia. So anesthetic and other operative complications are there. And there is also a need for specialized care throughout the rest of life. That means, and in electronic functioning electronic equipment is implanted in your body. So it can sometimes interact with electromagnetic interferences from other equipments. For example, if you are undergoing an MRI scan, certain precautions have to be taken, and MRI scan in a machine beyond a particular strength. MRI machine strength is measured in terms of the magnetic field strength of the machine. There are 1.5 Tesla machines, 3 Tesla machines, etc. Generally, more than 1.5 Tesla is contraindicated. You cannot do it once the patient has undergone DBS. So there are certain precautions to be taken because the implant is there in your body. So there is a need for some specialized care throughout the rest of life if you undergo DBS. So these are the disadvantages of DBS. Because of these disadvantages, nobody does DBS in a patient who is well controlled on medications. Only when your control of symptoms becomes inadequate, medical treatment has a lot of limitations, and medical treatment becomes inadequate, and you have your quality of life declines, then only you consider DBS, because then only the benefits of the surgery will outweigh the risks. So again, it's unable to arrest or slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. It can't prevent the long-term emergence of DBS refractory symptoms. Unfortunately, as of now, there is no therapy which can arrest the progression of Parkinson's disease. It is just like aging. Whatever you do, how much care you take, you cannot prevent your body from aging. If you are for 50 this year, next year you will be 60. Just like that. Not next year, after 10 years you will be 60. You cannot prevent that. Just like that. Parkinson's disease also, as years pass by, as decades pass by, symptoms, the disease progresses in the brain, and symptoms, newer and newer symptoms can occur. For example, at present, patient may not have any freezing of gait or imbalance or falls, but 5 years later, even after DBS, because of the progression of the disease, patient can have imbalance, falls, etc., or even cognitive dysfunction. So these symptoms are refractory, as we discussed. These are refractory to DBS, and thus in the long-term emergence of DBS refractory symptoms because of the progression of Parkinson's disease cannot be controlled, and may not be effective for most of the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease like depression, psychiatric symptoms, etc. Then it's a costly procedure, and there's a need to replace the stimulator. There are different types of stimulators, but some of the stimulators need to be replaced after 4 to 5 years. So that is also a limitation of DBS. So summarizing, at what stage should DBS be considered? So DBS is done. DBS is done to relieve the suffering from motor complications of Parkinson's disease. That is on and off states and dyskinesias. It is also sometimes done in levodopa unresponsive tremor. In some patients, in spite of taking maximum dose of syndopa or levodopa, their symptoms, other symptoms are controlled, but shaking doesn't control, gets controlled. So that is a feature seen in some patients with Parkinson's disease. Their tremor does not respond to levodopa at all. So such patients also, even if there are no dyskinesias or motor fluctuations, can undergo DBS. So it is done for to relieve the motor complications of Parkinson's disease. It is most useful in the mid stages of Parkinson's disease. It is not indicated in those with stable control of symptoms or medications in the early stages of PD. So similarly, it may not be effective to improve quality of life in the very advanced or very late stages in which imbalance, falls, cognitive changes, etc. have already set in. So it is typically done in those with mid stages, in the mid stages of Parkinson's disease. So the ideal patient for deep brain stimulation is one patient. So this is the patient who will benefit best. Somebody who has disabling motor fluctuations. That is, they need multiple doses of levodopa every day. With each dose, they improve very well, but improvement is only for a very brief period. And off time, their disability is marked. Then they may or may not have dyskinesias in node. They are able to function normally in node. If dyskinesia is controlled, that is, dyskinesia is there, that is, involuntary coriform dancing movements are there, but otherwise they are able to function normally in node. Their memory and intellectual status is essentially normal. Psychiatric symptoms are not present, or if present, they are well controlled. No major medical diseases like diabetes or hypertension, which is poorly controlled. They may have diabetes, hypertension, or other diseases, but they are all well controlled. And preferably age less than 70 years. This is a relative thing. I told you, like some patients, even if they are 72 or 73, otherwise they are quite healthy and active, satisfying all other criteria, it may be possible to take them. But generally, more than 70, you should think twice. Why is such a patient the ideal patient? This is because the disability in such patients is primarily stems from symptoms which are responsive to DBS. Therefore, improved ability to do activities and improved quality of life are expected following surgery in such patients. And benefits of surgery outweigh the risks. That is why this patient is a suitable patient for DBS. And on the other side, patients in whom DBS may not be a good choice. One group is a patient who is unable to function normally in on period also because of persisting mobility and balance problems. A patient is falling frequently in on, even during on because of severe freezing, they are unable to walk. So such patients are not candidates for DBS. Significant cognitive dysfunction, this patient is not a candidate. And as we discussed, active psychiatric disturbances, depression, suicidal ideation, psychosis, behavioral disturbances, these are all contraindications for DBS, and multiple medical comorbidities and advanced stage. Again, why? This is because the symptoms prohibiting such patients from doing their daily activities, that is imbalance and faults, levodopa unresponsive lowness, memory problems, intellectual problems, psychiatric disturbance, etc., are typically DBS unresponsive. So surgical risks outweigh whatever minimal benefits these patients are expected to get. And there are certain emerging technologies in DBS. One is rechargeable stimulators with the longer life. We have rechargeable stimulators even now up to 8 to 9 years, or some companies are giving 15 years, but maybe rechargeable stimulators with much more longer life may come, and patients may not even have to recharge the stimulator. Then focused stimulation of targets to maximize benefits and minimize side effects. Then recording signals signifying abnormal brain activity in a real-time fashion and automatically adjusting stimulation intensity accordingly. That is, the DBS system looks into the brain on every second, finds out when the pathological activity, abnormal activity is more, intensifies the stimulation. Then when the abnormal activity is less, it withdraws the stimulation or reduces the intensity of stimulation. That is an online monitoring of the activity and tailoring the stimulation accordingly. That is also another emerging technique in DBS. So these are I will just want to show one or two videos. I would request to that stop.
We'll pause the record.
Pause the recording because these are confidential videos. We take consent from the patient. So I request all of you also not to record these videos because these are taken with patient's consent, written consent, just to for educational purposes. So we promise mankind there is no cure for Parkinson's disease. There is no cure. Most diseases affecting mankind, there is no cure. Diabetes, there is no cure. Hypertension, you have to take medications lifelong. So most of the diseases, except for maybe infections and cancers, these are the two conditions. Even though cancer is a very dangerous and everybody is afraid of cancers, the fact is that some of the cancers are curable, and once cured, patient can have a normal life. Similarly, infections also, many of them can be cured, and or all of them, most of them can be cured, and patient can have a normal life after that. Apart from these, most other conditions are chronic conditions which needs long time or lifelong treatment. Parkinson's disease is also like that. But with available medical and surgical treatments, they are very effective in controlling symptoms and enabling a near normal life for patients with Parkinson's disease. Such treatments improve the quality of life of patients with Parkinson's disease, improve longevity, and therefore and there is also a lot of active research aimed at a better medical and surgical treatment modalities ongoing all over the world. So there is a lot of hope for patients with Parkinson's disease. Nobody needs to be desperate or hopeless because they have Parkinson's disease. There are a lot of people who have changed the history of the world who had Parkinson's disease. So this gentleman, he is the father of modern medicine. His name is William Osler. He is considered as the father of modern medicine. There is a famous statement which every doctor keeps in his mind. Aim of medical science is to cure sometimes. That means you are able to cure a disease only in very few occasions. As we discussed, some of the infections are curable, some of the cancers may be curable, but cure is there possible only sometimes. Relieve often. Most of the situations you will be able to relieve the symptoms of the patient, and comfort and console always. So that is the aim of this. Is not my statement. This is William Osler's statement several decades or centuries ago, but this holds good even now. And this is just to inspire you. You know that all of them, they are all people who changed the destiny of the world. You know, one is Pope John Paul II. Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali was he was an artist. Yasser Arafat, everybody knows, the Nobel laureate. He was the Palestine's leader. Muhammad Ali was a famous boxer. Next person, he also changed the history of the world. Adolf Hitler. Then Mao Zedong also similarly he changed. They are all world leaders. All of them. Like Adolf Hitler may not be a good leader, but he was a leader. So all of them, there is there's a similarity among all of them. Similarity is that all of them had either Parkinson's disease or a condition very similar to Parkinson's disease. This is just to show that Parkinson's disease doesn't limit anybody's disability. It is, nobody needs to be upset because I have Parkinson's disease. There are treatment options for Parkinson's disease, and which can improve the quality of life, and in the long run, so many other things, so many breakthrough research activities are ongoing, and so many important results are expected in the near future. So we all can be hopeful. Thank you.